Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to episode 5 of season 2 of the World History Geography GCast that's presented by Smithsonian Institute. Today, we will be looking at the executive branch. All right, so we're going to look at, of course, the president, the leader of the executive branch, but also all the things that fall within the executive branch. So let's dive right in. Make sure you're checking out the Where in the World, Donde en el Mundo on the Instagram for the classroom. And other than that, keep in mind there will be a Google assessment at the end of this for the two bigger concepts in here. I'll talk more about that at the end. All right, so the executive branch. It's discussed in Article 2 of the Constitution. And basically what the executive branch is supposed to do is enforce the laws. All right, so Constitution is the set of laws that gets added on by the legislative branch. So the legislative branch creates the laws. The executive branch will enforce the laws. By next week, we'll be talking about like the separation of powers and how each branch does specific things and kind of limits each. So we'll go into that in the separation of powers in more detail a little bit later. But for now, we're just looking at what each one does. So executive branch enforces laws. Qualifications and salary. In order to be president, you must be a natural-born citizen, 35 years old, and a resident of the United States for 14 years. Now, natural-born citizen must have been born on American soil. All right. The president makes $400,000 a year. Vice president, $230,700. All right. So, all things considered, for being the quote-unquote leader of the free world, you don't make that much money within a year. But generally speaking, you're not in it for the money. The oath of office is now required as by the 20th Amendment, which means before the president and the rest of the executive branch can take office, they must take an oath of office. All right, so that was not in the original Constitution. It is the 20th Amendment. Moving on. In case of a vacancy, meaning either the president is no longer able to carry out the duties of president, or ranging from illnesses to death, there is an order of succession. And this was not always the case. All right. There's a lot of written in history where first ladies have helped, or other parts of the executive branch have helped run things while the country did not know that the president was not in a good state of health. All right, so the order of succession goes as vice president, then Speaker of the House of the Representatives, and then President pro tempore, which would be the leader of the Senate. So it goes vice president, leader of the House, leader of the Senate. Okay. Resignation and impeachment. These are ways to leave the presidency or the executive branch. Impeachment would be that you're charged with a crime, right? And what's happened 3 times now in U.S. history. Andrew Johnson is the first instance, Bill Clinton in the 1990s, and most recently with Donald Trump. Resignation would be the president leaving on their own or because of maybe some pressure to leave. This has happened one time in history, and that is with Richard Nixon. Now, impeachment does not mean that you committed the crime necessarily, or that you can no longer can be president. What it means is that they're looking into the conduct of that person and whether they should still hold that position. So impeachment is voted on by the House. It then moves to the Senate. The Senate will hear out the trial like it's a general court, and will decide if this person is guilty of the crimes charged with impeachment. We have never, and if they are found guilty of committing these crimes, then they are removed from office. We have not yet had that final step happen. The closest we've come was Andrew Johnson, a single vote. So very close with Johnson. Nixon is long rumored to have been considered that he would have been fully impeached and brought out of office, but he resigns before he was even impeached. So it's unlikely. We'll never know. Okay, so moving on. So some of the specific duties of the executive branch. Foreign affairs. Generally speaking, the executive branch is seen as a leader for United States foreign affairs. They're going to be the ones setting the treaties, trade deals, assigning ambassadors. This is all under the executive branch. not just the president. Keep in mind, the president will also consult the vice president and his cabinet, or their cabinet. Domestic and military administration, the executive branch, or the president, is commander-in-chief of the armed forces, will take in counsel and advice from everyone in the appropriate kind of jobs for military personnel, and then will make the final decision. So president is the commander-in-chief. Legislation, president can call special sessions, can give down vetoes, but also the State of the Union address. State of the Union is given in January of each year. It is typically when the president gets both parts of Congress together and says, this is what I think we need to work on. This is where we are. This is the state, the current state of our union, the United States. All right. So he's basically saying, this is what we got to do. And it's up to Congress if they want to follow some of these things that they need to maybe make laws on, or if they just want to go their own direction. Keep in mind, the executive branch cannot make laws, but they can give suggestions and they can veto certain laws they can guide the law making process. They can't do it themselves. Appointment. There's a lot of judges, cabinet members, and a lot of other positions that are appointed by the president. Usually they fall under the executive branch, some of them in the judicial branch. All right, so judges, federal judges is a very important role that the executive branch carries out, is appointing these judges. All of these appointments do have to be approved by the Senate. So the cabinet members must be good people. They can't just be random people off the street. They're supposed to be kind of cleared for approval by the Senate. And in certain judicial functions, the executive branch or the president has the power to grant pardons and reprieves for federal crimes. So most recently, President Trump gave a pardon to an ex-Illinois governor, Rod Blagojevich, and he had committed a federal crime, or was in prison for a federal crime, allegedly selling or taking bribes for Barack Obama's Senate seat, because Barack Obama was a senator and then became president. So that gave an opening for the Senate. And as you'll learn next year in Illinois Constitution, the governor has the role to appoint the person to kind of fill in for that time being. So that was where that kind of came from. So President Trump granted a pardon to Rod Blagojevich for that federal crime. All right, so presidential cabinet, there are 15 cabinet members. It was not always that many. It used to just be 5 and 8. It's kind of slowly built up. All right, I'll give you all the departments and what they generally do. So the Department of State is going to be the department that's in charge of foreign affairs. All right, the Secretary of State is the one that's supposed to be the best person for going and making sure we're doing all right with everyone else in the world. They're going to be the ones meeting with other countries. Department of the Treasury is going to manage the finances, obviously. Department of Interior is in charge of natural parks and resources, such as energy as well. Department of Agriculture, obviously farming, production, and education. Farming education, not just education itself. Department of Justice enforces the laws in federal courts. Department of Education manages education programs. Department of Veteran Affairs assists veterans in many ways. There's hospitals, there's the GI Bill, there's all sorts of ways that the Veteran Affairs Office is supposed to be there to help veterans. Department of Labor makes sure that labor standards are being held up. There's hours, there's wages, there's certain things that have to be met to make sure that the corporations are treating their workers fairly. Department of Commerce, which is going to be businesses looking in to make sure small businesses, but also bigger corporations are able to conduct businesses to the best of their ability. Department of Defense, which is also going to be where that's where the Pentagon is. All right. A lot of their officers will work in the Pentagon. They're going to be the ones that really help with carrying out wars. So a lot of military people will be in the Department of Defense. Department of Housing addresses city problems. If there needs to be low-income housing, maybe subsidized, so the government helps pay for a portion of the housing because there's so many people in an area that maybe need housing, so that would be covered under here. Department of Transportation regulates transportation, highways, stuff like that, making sure that we've got good speed limits, we've got good roads. All right. Department of Energy, policies for the energy industry. This has had a lot of been in the news a lot recently with like Standing Rock and other reservations because of the idea of fracking. Also going to be like oil industry. If you hear anything about coal, nuclear power, all of this is going to fall under the Department of Energy. Department of Health and Human Services, basically health matters and programs, things to assist people. In an Illinois example, this would be food stamps. This would also be Medicare, Medicaid, different programs that are supposed to help people that have low income. Department of Homeland Security, that's going to protect and monitor national security. Now, lastly, we're going to talk about the Electoral College. All right, so this is something that gets talked about a lot. It doesn't seem to be very well understood. So the Electoral College, to put it as simply as possible, is how the president is selected. The Electoral College is comprised of electors from each state. It represents the amount of Senate plus House votes that each state gets. So every state is at least guaranteed 3, because 2 senators and 1 rep at the very least, getting a flood alert all of a sudden. And this is developed because the founders did not think that they could trust the common man to directly elect a president. They did not think that everyday people were informed enough about the country and what was happening in the world that they could pick a leader. All right. They didn't think that the leader, the president, would have been the bigger worry for an election. The founding fathers considered the legislative branch to be the most important branch when they first created this, because you can directly vote for who is going to be making these laws and all these different things that govern the United States. They didn't view the president as that important versus being able to pick your representative. All right. Keep in mind also, common man in the 1700s necessarily did not read at all, if not very much. So they're not wrong. The common man at this time was not the most, or common person was not the most informed. There's definitely a lot more of a movement nowadays to abolish the Electoral College and have a representative vote. But that's a debate we can have for another day. This is just to explain what the Electoral College is. So again, it's the total number of senators plus reps that equals the electors. And the electors vote based on how the state populations generally vote. So it's generally proportionate, but not always. All right, so that's where you kind of see some disagreements in the popular vote versus the electoral vote. All right. One example of how this could get out of skew. In the most recent election, it has been reported that Hillary Clinton had a bigger popular vote win. However, Donald Trump clearly won the electoral vote. And the way this is example would be the margin of victory in, let's say, California, a state with a lot of population. Doesn't matter if you win by 1 vote or if you win by millions of votes, you're going to get all of those electoral votes. So if Hillary Clinton wins California, she gets, I think it's like 47. She'll get 47 electoral votes. But if she wins it by 15 million, she still only gets those 47 votes. So you can see that in the space of 14 million votes, it doesn't really matter either way. So that's how you can have that spacing of, you can win more people, but there's only so many electoral votes that you can get from that. All right. So that is one of the, and because if you win by 14 million votes and it doesn't really technically matter, that's where a lot of people say that it doesn't matter to vote for the president because it's all about the electoral votes. It's not exactly true. Just keep in mind, the electors are going to vote based on how the state populations vote. So as it stands, everyone should continue to always vote. It's their best civic duty, but also it's supposed to be somewhat representative. So not exactly, that's a debate we'll have for another day. That does conclude what we're going to be talking about with the executive branch. What I do need you to do now, go over to Google Classroom. There's going to be an assessment on the executive branch itself, but then also on the cabinet. So make sure you check those out. And then I also will upload one more game for you to play. I believe it's called Executive Command on iCivic. So make sure you check out for those 2 things. Got any questions, make sure you email me or come see me at the office hours 12:30 to 1. And also keep an eye out for a new survey coming out where you got the Gibbies, 7th grade. You don't know what this is about. I'll give you more details as that's coming up. But it's a nice award show that will get televised at least on YouTube, I suppose. And you have a voice that you can kind of vote for an award for your peers. All right. Other than that, have a great rest of your day. I look forward to seeing you again soon.